May 23, 1939, 0740 hours, 47 miles southeast of Portsmouth, New Hampshire. The pencil trembled in Lieutenant Oliver Naquin's hand as he marked the dive log, recording what should have been routine. A test dive, the 19th successful descent for the newest submarine in the United States Navy fleet, the USS Squalus. 310 feet of cutting-edge naval technology, commissioned just 2 months earlier. Everything indicated readiness for a safe dive. Naquin stood at the diving control station in the control room, watching his crew execute their duties with precision. At age 35, the Louisiana native had earned his reputation as a strict disciplinarian. Every action his sailors took while diving was crucial. A single mistake in these iron coffins could doom them all. Submarining in 1939 remained what sailors grimly called the coffin service. Between 1921 and 1938, 825 men had died in 18 submarines from various countries. Heroic rescue attempts had always failed. 63 feet into their descent, a voice cracked through the intercom from the engine room. The words that would haunt Naquin for the rest of his life. "Take her up, the induction's open." Seawater sprayed throughout the aft compartments. Naquin's training took over instantly. "Close all watertight hatches." The massive steel doors slammed shut throughout the submarine, sealing men into their compartments, some to safety, others to death. The forward compartments, where Naquin stood, would become a tomb or a sanctuary. The answer depended on men who at that moment had no idea the Squalus had just sunk. Within minutes, the submarine settled keel down on the Atlantic Ocean floor, 240 feet beneath the surface. 4 compartments flooded, 26 men dead. Drowned in the ice-cold water that had poured through the failed engine air induction valve. In the forward compartments, 33 men remained alive, 32 crew members and 1 civilian. Naval architect Harold Preble, who had been overseeing the submarine's test dive performance. The surviving men found themselves in 3 forward compartments separated by watertight doors. The control room held Lieutenant Naquin and most of the officers. The forward torpedo room contained sailors who had been preparing equipment. The forward battery compartment housed others. They huddled in darkness as the temperature dropped. Ice began forming on the bulkheads. The submarine's interior, normally kept at 65 degrees Fahrenheit, plummeted toward freezing as the Atlantic's 34-degree water leached heat through the steel hull. The toxic air caused some to vomit. Carbon dioxide levels rose with each breath. The chemical carbon dioxide absorbent canisters could only do so much. Some men developed splitting headaches. Others felt dizzy and disoriented. The chlorine gas, from seawater contaminating the battery cells, added another danger. Sailors worked frantically to isolate the batteries and prevent a catastrophic explosion. Their quick action saved lives even as the air quality deteriorated. Naquin ordered his men to stay calm, to lie down, to try to rest, not to talk. They needed to preserve their strength and conserve the limited air. He calculated they could last 48 hours if they didn't use too much oxygen. The men lay on the cold deck, wrapped in whatever clothing and blankets they could find. Some prayed silently. Others thought of their families. Some kept checking watches, counting the hours. Others tried to keep spirits up with quiet jokes, though voices trembled. The Squalus had missed her scheduled communication check. 1 hour passed, then another. At Portsmouth Naval Base, Commander Cyrus Cole realized something was catastrophically wrong. He ordered an immediate and massive rescue attempt. The USS Sculpin, the Squalus, sister ship, was dispatched to search for the missing submarine. But there was a problem that would prove nearly fatal. The Squalus' last transmitted coordinates were several miles from her true location. The Sculpin searched the wrong area for hours. As darkness fell on May 23, the families of 59 men waited for news, wives, mothers, children. They gathered at the Portsmouth Naval Base, their faces etched with fear. The women stood together trying to comfort each other. They helped organize food and coffee for the growing crowd. In the submarine community, everyone knew the grim statistics. No crew had ever been rescued from a depth greater than 20 feet. At 240 feet, the Squalus crew was beyond any proven rescue capability. The submarine's designers had anticipated this nightmare. Built into the Squalus were emergency systems that now represented the only hope for the trapped men. Naqueen ordered the release of a marker buoy attached to a telephone cable. On the side of the buoy, lettering declared, "Submarine sunk here. Telephone inside." The buoy broke the surface after midnight. The Sculpin's lookouts spotted smoke signals at 0400 hours on May 24. Then they found the bright yellow buoy bobbing in the choppy Atlantic waters. Inside was the telephone that rang directly to the submarine. Lieutenant John Nichols of the Squalus grabbed the receiver and quickly conveyed their dire situation. 33 men alive in the forward compartments, 26 dead in the aft sections, 240 feet down, air running out. Then he went to get Lieutenant Naquin. Naquin took the phone and greeted the Sculpin's captain, his voice steady despite the circumstances. But he had only seconds to speak before the cable snapped, cutting off communication. The trapped men were alone again in their iron tomb. Yet something critical had changed. The Navy now knew exactly where the Squalus lay. They knew men were alive, and they knew they had less than 48 hours to accomplish what had never been done before: rescue submariners from 240 feet beneath the ocean surface. 200 miles south in Washington at the Navy Yard, a phone rang in the office of Lieutenant Commander Charles Bowers Momsen, the call that would define his legacy. Momsen, nicknamed Swede, had spent years preparing for exactly this moment. A moment he prayed would never come, but knew was inevitable. Momsen had graduated from the United States Naval Academy in 1919, 1 year early due to World War I. His path to submarine service began in 1921, when he entered the submarine school in New London, Connecticut. Within 2 years, he had his first command, the submarine 015. September 25, 1925 changed everything. The USS 51, sister ship to Momsen's S1, collided with the freighter City of Rome near Block Island. She sank in 130 feet of water. Momsen was ordered to take his submarine to search for the crippled vessel. He found the oil slick marking the spot. But without sonar, there was no way to locate the submarine on the bottom, no way to reach the trapped men. All 33 crew members died slowly as their air ran out. Momsen stood on the deck of his submarine, knowing his friends were dying below him, and felt utterly helpless. That feeling sparked an obsession. He began working on rescue equipment during his off-duty hours. First came a one-man breathing device, an oblong rubber bag that recycled exhaled air using soda lime to remove carbon dioxide. The press enthusiastically received the device and dubbed it the Momsen lung. Between June 1929 and September 1932, Momsen developed and personally tested the lung at a depth of 200 feet. The Navy awarded him the Distinguished Service Medal in 1929. But Momsen knew the lung had severe limitations. It required the submariner to make a free ascent through water that could kill through pressure, temperature, or the bends. What he really wanted was a way to bring rescue to the submarine itself. He conceived a diving bell that could be lowered to a submarine in distress, mate with an escape hatch, and allow trapped submariners to climb inside without ever entering the water. In 1926, Momsen proposed the adoption of a diving bell for submarine rescue purposes to the Bureau of Construction and Repair. His drawings were reviewed and returned with a single word stamped across them: Impractical. Then in December 1927 came another disaster. USS 4 sank off Cape Cod after being accidentally rammed by a Coast Guard destroyer. The submarine bottomed in 110 feet of water. 6 sailors in the forward torpedo room were initially alive. They tapped signals on the hull to Navy divers working in the brutal cold and tangled wreckage. The tapping continued for days. Divers could hear the men inside begging for rescue. But a storm forced a stop to the salvage attempts on December 24. All 40 men aboard the S-4 died. The public was outraged. The Navy was humiliated. And Charles Momsen was more determined than ever. Momsen returned to his diving bell idea in 1930. He built a prototype using a watertight aircraft hangar from his old submarine, the S-1. He tested it off Key West, Florida. The initial results were discouraging. Momsen found the bell unstable. It tipped, it leaked. But before he could make the necessary modifications, the Navy ordered him to the Bureau of Construction and Repair to teach submariners how to use the Momsen lung. He needed someone he trusted to complete the diving bell revisions. Lieutenant Commander Alan Rockwell McCann was put in charge of the final modifications. McCann worked from July 1929 to July 1931 in the Maintenance Division at the From the Maintenance Division, Bureau of Construction and Repair. He incorporated all of Momsen's recommended changes plus additional improvements: a floor bulkhead to prevent tipping, a pneumatic winch for better control, a pressure seal allowing direct transfer of survivors to the diving bell in a dry environment, a rubber gasket embedded into a circular groove on the bottom edge, creating a watertight seal when pressed against the flat mounting ring welded around submarine hatches. When the redesigned diving bell was completed in late 1930, the Navy introduced it as the McCann Submarine Rescue Chamber. Through the early 1930s, McCann rescue chambers were built and distributed to submarine rescue ships. The USS S-4, raised and reconditioned after the disaster, became a floating test laboratory. Momsen went to sea aboard her to conduct practical experiments and training with the rescue chambers. But by 1939, despite years of training, the McCann rescue chamber had never been used in an actual emergency. It remained theoretical, unproven. Some in the Navy brass still considered it unnecessary. Now, at 0400 hours on May 24, 1939, Lieutenant Commander Momsen received the call that would prove either his vindication or his greatest failure. Momsen grabbed his diving equipment and assembled a team of the Navy's best divers. They jammed into a convoy of cars escorted by local and state police. The convoy screamed up the coast from Washington to Portsmouth, a distance of over 400 miles. They were traveling so fast that the police escort couldn't keep up as they passed through Boston. Red lights were ignored. Intersections were blocked for their passage. Momsen and his team arrived at Portsmouth at 04:15 hours on May 24. They had made the journey in record time. But would they arrive in time to save the 33 men trapped beneath the Atlantic? Meanwhile, the submarine rescue ship USS Falcon was racing north from New London, Connecticut, 200 miles of ocean. The Falcon was a 187-foot minesweeper that had been converted for submarine rescue operations. On her deck sat the untested McCann rescue chamber that Momsen and McCann had spent years developing. The chamber was 10 feet high and 7 feet wide. It weighed 21,600 pounds. 2 compartments, upper and lower, separated by a floor bulkhead. The lower compartment would mate with the submarine hatch. The upper compartment would carry survivors to the surface. The Falcon moored over the Squalus location on the morning of May 24. The marker buoy bobbed nearby, its telephone cable severed but its position marking the submarine's location. Commander Momsen took charge of the operation. His first task was to send divers down to confirm the submarine's exact position and condition, to attach guide wires that would allow the rescue chamber to descend directly to the escape hatch. The divers who would make this dangerous descent understood the risks better than anyone. 240 feet represented the extreme limit of diving operations in 1939. At that depth, water pressure reached over 100 pounds per square inch, 7 times normal atmospheric pressure. Every breath required enormous effort. The human body was not designed to function under such crushing force. Divers had to overcome their body's natural panic response, their chests compressed. Their lungs struggled to expand against the weight pressing down on them. The sensation was of being slowly squeezed in a vice. The cold Atlantic water hovered just above freezing, 34 degrees Fahrenheit. A diver's body temperature would drop rapidly despite the insulating layers of the canvas suit. Hypothermia could incapacitate a man within minutes if his suit flooded or tore. The lead boots and brass helmet that protected him also conducted cold directly into his body. Feet went numb within 20 minutes. Hands lost feeling and dexterity. Simple tasks like tying knots became nearly impossible as fingers stiffened. But the most insidious danger was nitrogen narcosis, the rapture of the deep, divers called it. At depth, nitrogen in compressed air dissolved into the blood and brain tissue, producing effects similar to alcohol intoxication. Judgment became impaired. Simple tasks became impossibly complex. Some divers experienced euphoria and removed their helmets underwater, convinced they could breathe the water. Others hallucinated. Still others became paranoid. Nitrogen narcosis had killed experienced divers at far shallower depths. The narcosis began around 100 feet for most men. By 200 feet, it was severe. At 240 feet, divers operated in a dreamlike state where thoughts moved through molasses. Every action had to be planned in advance, rehearsed mentally, because in the moment of execution, the diver might forget what he was doing. Momsen and his team had pioneered the use of helium-oxygen mixtures that reduced nitrogen narcosis. By replacing nitrogen with helium, divers could maintain better mental clarity. But even with this innovation, 240 feet remained extraordinarily dangerous. If a diver ascended too quickly, nitrogen bubbles would form in his blood and tissues. The bends, officially called decompression sickness, caused excruciating pain. Joints locked. Blood vessels ruptured. Paralysis. Death. Divers needed to make carefully timed decompression stops during their ascent, spending minutes at specific depths to allow nitrogen to safely leave their systems. But in an emergency, when air was running low or equipment failing, those stops might be impossible. The diver had to choose between probable death from the bends or certain death from drowning. Visibility at 240 feet was measured in inches. The Atlantic waters off New Hampshire carried sediment and plankton that scattered light. Even with powerful underwater lamps, divers often worked by feel alone. They could not see their own feet. They navigated by intuition and experience, feeling their way along guide ropes, trusting their training. The water current could grab a diver and slam him into the submarine hull or tangle him in cables. The massive steel hull of the Squalus loomed in the darkness. One wrong move, one moment of panic, and a diver could become trapped beneath the submarine or lost in the infinite black of the Atlantic. The guide ropes were their lifeline. Without them, a diver could swim in circles, unable to find the submarine or the surface until his air ran out. Chief Torpedoman Martin Sabitsky volunteered to go first. He had trained for years in deep diving operations, but training and reality were vastly different experiences. If Sabitsky failed to attach the guide wires correctly, the rescue chamber might not mate properly with the submarine hatch. The entire rescue could fail. 33 men would die. The weight of that responsibility pressed on Sabitsky as heavily as the water pressure would press on his body. He suited up in the heavy canvas diving suit, brass helmet, lead boots. Air hoses and communication lines were checked and rechecked. The helmet was lowered over his head and locked to the suit's collar. The faceplate was secured. His breathing echoed loud in the enclosed space. At 1100 hours, Sabitsky began his descent into the black water. On the Squalus, the 33 survivors heard the hollow clang of lead boots on the hull. They cheered. Someone had found them. Sabitsky worked in pitch darkness, his hands numb from the cold attaching guide wires to the submarine's forward escape hatch. The hatch had been specially fitted with a flat mounting ring, a modification implemented across the fleet specifically for the McCann chamber. His movements were slow and deliberate. Each action had to be perfect. He could feel the nitrogen narcosis beginning to affect him, a pleasant floating sensation that he knew was dangerous. He forced himself to focus. One cable, then another, then a third for redundancy. He tested each attachment, pulling hard to ensure it would hold. Finally satisfied, he signaled to be brought up. The ascent took longer than the descent as he stopped at each decompression depth, but he returned safely to the surface. The path was ready. At 11:30 hours, the McCann rescue chamber began its first operational descent. Not a training exercise, not a test, a real rescue with real lives depending on every action. The chamber hung from a cable attached to a winch aboard the Falcon. As it descended through the green-black water, its two operators inside experienced increasing pressure that made their ears pop and their breathing labored. The chamber's steel walls groaned and creaked under the mounting external pressure. At 240 feet, the water pushed against every square inch with crushing force. Two men rode inside the chamber, torpedoman's Mate John Mihailovsky and gunner's Mate Walter Harmon. Both had trained extensively with the rescue chamber, but like Subitsky, they faced the reality that no amount of training could fully prepare them for this moment. They were about to attempt something that had never been successfully accomplished in human history. If anything went wrong, if the chamber flooded or became stuck, they would die along with the men they were trying to save. They brought supplies the survivors desperately needed. Hot pea soup in insulated containers, still steaming despite the cold. Sandwiches wrapped carefully to stay fresh. Milk in bottles, extra blankets and flashlights. Medical supplies in case of injuries. These simple items represented more than physical sustenance. They were proof that the outside world had not forgotten the trapped men, that rescue was actually happening. The descent took nearly an hour. Mihailovsky and Harmon monitored gauges showing depth, pressure, and ballast levels. They communicated constantly with the Falcon above through a telephone line. Every few feet, they adjusted the chamber's buoyancy by bleeding air or taking on water. Too much positive buoyancy, and the chamber might shoot to the surface uncontrollably. Too much negative buoyancy, and it might plunge to the ocean floor. The operators needed to maintain neutral buoyancy, allowing the cable to control their descent while they made micro-adjustments. The chamber had a complex ballast system that required constant attention. Water could be admitted into tanks to increase weight. Compressed air could be blown into the tanks to expel water and create buoyancy. The operators had to calculate these adjustments precisely. Too much air and the chamber would rise too fast, potentially breaking the cable. Too little air, and the chamber would sink too fast, potentially slamming into the submarine hull. As the chamber descended along the guide wires that Subitsky had attached, the two operators carefully managed the ballast. They could feel when the chamber contacted the guide wires, a slight vibration transmitted through the steel hull. This feedback told them they were on course, descending toward the correct location. Without the guide wires, finding the submarine's escape hatch in the darkness would be impossible. At 240 feet, the chamber made contact with the Squalus hull. The impact was gentle but unmistakable. A soft thud as steel met steel. Inside the submarine, the trapped men felt the contact and cheered weakly. Their voices were hoarse from dehydration and the toxic air. But the sound of the rescue chamber arriving gave them strength they thought they had lost. Mihailovsky and Harmon now faced the most critical phase of the operation. They needed to position the chamber precisely over the escape hatch. A few inches off-center and the rubber gasket would not seal properly. Water would flood into the chamber and submarine when they tried to open the hatches. The positioning process took 20 minutes of careful adjustments. Mihailovsky communicated with divers outside who confirmed the chamber's alignment. The divers, working in the darkness at 240 feet, used their hands to feel the gap between the chamber and the mounting ring. They guided the operators with specific instructions. Finally, they were centered. The downhaul cable was attached to a special bail welded over the submarine's hatch. A diver had to attach this cable from outside, working by feel in the darkness. Once attached, the cable could be winched tight, pulling the chamber down firmly against the flat mounting ring around the hatch. The operators began winching. Slowly, steadily, the chamber pressed against the hull. The rubber gasket on the bottom of the chamber compressed against the mounting ring, creating what they hoped was a watertight seal. Now came the moment of truth. Water in the lower compartment of the rescue chamber needed to be blown out using compressed air. If the seal leaked, seawater would pour in as fast as they could pump it out. The chamber would flood, the rescue would fail. Mihailovsky opened the compressed air valve. The sound of rushing air filled the chamber. Water began draining from the lower compartment into the ballast tanks. The operators watched the water level drop. 6 inches, 1 foot, 2 feet. The seal was holding. The chamber's pressure increased as they filled it with air, equalizing with the pressure inside the Squalus. This equalization was essential. If the pressure remained unequal, the hatches would be impossible to open. The pressure differential would hold them shut as firmly as if they were welded closed. Gauges showed the pressure rising. 40 pounds per square inch. 50. 60. Equal to the submarine's internal pressure. The pressurized air in the lower chamber was then released into the upper compartment and vented to the surface through a hose until the chamber and submarine reached equal pressure. This venting process had to be done slowly and carefully. Too fast, and the pressure changes could cause injury to everyone inside both the chamber and the submarine. Only after complete pressure equalization could the hatches be safely opened. Mihailovsky unlatched the chamber's bottom hatch. It swung open freely. He could see the submarine's hatch below him, just a few feet away. He unlatched the submarine's hatch and pushed it open upward. He was greeted with the pale, exhausted faces of the Squalus crew. Men who had spent nearly 24 hours in a freezing tomb, wondering if they would ever see daylight again. Mihailovsky passed down the hot soup and food. One survivor slurped his hot soup and managed a joke. "Where in the hell are the napkins?" The small moment of humor broke the tension.